morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the High Dragon's Breath Bow Wow, welcoming you back to another episode of Archon's Armies. Today we are finishing off our Navy series. I know it's been a wild month for our Navy series, but we are finally at the last faction that I'm really going to do a lot of naval focus on. At some point, the Tyranids may get a video if enough people ask for it, but considering that their ships literally don't have all that much in terms of designated classes and a lot more to do with weight classes, we may save them for a more generic miscellaneous ships video sometime in the future. But with that out of the way, let me finish off my promise to all of you and get this naval series ended with the Necron Navy. What are they, and what do they do? I love this art up here. Look at this. It's almost like a black Citadel ship. Beautiful art, really. I have no idea what class this is, and I couldn't find anything detailing what exactly it was, but man, is it pretty. The Necrons have a pretty unique system for their navy. When it is used, it is usually in massive numbers. They don't really do any raiding or small parties. Matter of fact, they very rarely even send out escorts by themselves. That basically never happens. It's been recorded about 2 times in Imperial history that an escort was found without a capital class ship to go with it. So, the Necron Navy is very heavily weighted towards its capital ships, but that doesn't mean that they have a lot of capital ships. That just means that every single fleet will have at least one quote-unquote capital ship. These are usually paired with light cruisers that then have pairs of escorts looking out for them. Essentially, it's almost like a pyramid scheme navy. You have the capital ship at the very top of the pyramid, then below it you have 2 cruisers, and then below it you have another pair of escorts, or a diamond shape if you only want to have a single pair. But this has an odd effect. A lot of their fleets are kind of weird because they are powerful enough to deal with enemy patrols of cruisers fairly well, wiping the floor with the average Imperial patrol, but they will struggle on their own with larger battle fleets because multiple capital class ships against only one capital class ship that is in reality only equivalent to a battle cruiser is not a very fair or even fight. So what characterizes the Necron Navy? Well, lighter armor, and by lighter armor I don't mean any particularly armored areas, and in comparison where some forces tend to take the upper armor, the Necrons tend to take the lowest armor of their class type. So cruisers are not cruiser frontal armor, it's cruiser side armor, and that's the entire 360 protection of the Necron vessels. In addition, they are slow. There are basically no Necron vessels that are moving faster than 5 grav, and the majority of them are only moving 2 or 3 grav per turn, and that's if they accelerate. So they're not moving all that quickly. However, this is augmented with 2 advantages that the Necrons have. The first one is teleportation. Not only can they use the inertialess drive along with dolmen gates and various other faster-than-light travel methods, they also have the ability to transit themselves mid-combat via essentially using the inertialess drive to teleport behind or around a target. This gives them a lot of mobility, which makes up for the fact that they are slow as fuck in most cases, and the other thing that makes up for their low armor is regeneration. They do also have some decent armament, but because of how it's mounted, they rely upon their teleportation and their regeneration to make up for their weak side. So it's kind of an odd navy. We're not going to be talking a lot about certain types of protection, and matter of fact, a lot of the numbers for protection are oddly low. Just remember that all of these Necron ships are constantly repairing themselves, so if they're taking chip damage, they're simply going to be able to outgrind the enemy because they're getting back health every single turn, and enemy ships cannot gain back health that consistently. Then they have a weird other thing. This is an interesting synergy that the Necrons have. They have a combinations of weapons. Essentially, they have a 1-2 punch for all of their ship types. And now there aren't a lot of various configurations of Necron ships. There are a few, and we'll talk about the 7 or 8 main ones here, but almost all of them work on the same principle. They carry one weapon that deals with shields very well, and they carry one weapon that deals with unshielded vessels very well. And if they have them together, the idea is you blast down the shields with one weapon, and then you use the second weapon to blow open the enemy's ship itself. So that combo holds very consistent. It's almost like ships that use a combination of macro cannons and lances. The difference is that the Necrons just go really, really hard in the paint, with one side being very good for shields, one side being very good for unshielded vessels, and they don't really cross over as much as lances and macro cannons do. Because macro cannons can still do a lot of damage against shielded ships and unshielded ships. Lances, they can do decent damage against shielded and unshielded if they're broadside weapons, but the Necrons don't really do that. They have a very much polarized weapons arsenal. Their slow speed is made up for again by that FTL travel and short-term inertialess drive jumps. The inertialess drive jumps are something that they can do in a limited number of times during combat. In reality, it allows them to travel basically 2 times their speed instantaneously and change their orientation by 180 degrees. That does mean that they can Omaiwamu Shinderu behind an enemy ship and shoot them in the rear, and force the enemy ship to turn around in order to deal with them. And then, of course, the ship can inertialess drive a second time and teleport behind the other ship again. This makes fighting the Necrons incredibly frustrating because, oh my god, is it super annoying to have these enemy ships constantly moving around in your backline, and because of the way that the Necrons' weapons are oriented, the Necrons never have any reason to go broadside to the enemy, which means that if at any point they're in a disadvantageous situation or position, they will just teleport away and put themselves in a better place. They can only do this again a limited number of times per game, basically 2 per ship. But that's still crazy. The fact that they can basically teleport behind an enemy twice per game makes a massive difference with how these ships operate. Invasion fleets and non. Again, that kind of capital ship, light cruiser escort fleet, that would be typical of a invasion fleet. The defense fleets, on the other hand, tend to have a lot of other types of vessels, and I know a lot of people are waiting for me to talk about like some crazy Necron shit, like the World Ender stuff and planet-destroying things. We're not going to go into that in this video. Those are not standard ships. They're not on every single Tomb World. Hell, not even every dynasty has access to one of those crazy things. But you would expect one of those to be with a defensive fleet until they were really needed for an invasion fleet. So you can kind of think of the Necron fleets as, you know, the white blood cell fleet that's on the defensive all the time. It's going to be a couple of light cruisers and a capital ship, and then the invasion fleet is going to be that full triangle organization of capital ship, light cruiser, escort, essentially. So, Necron's interesting thing also, they have no voids. So, Necron ships have 0 void shields. They do not have void shielding, they do not travel into the warp, so they don't have Geller fields. They are essentially completely unprotected, and they are relying upon their armor and their impressive regeneration. To give you a reference, most of these ships have around 120 or something health, and they will be able to heal themselves 10 each turn, boosting it to 20 if they don't want to accelerate the ship. So, regaining 20 health each turn will essentially cancel out a lot of damage from Tier 1 weaponry, unless you're getting absolutely overwhelmed. And this is one of the references to why Necron ships often go down, is that they're getting attacked by lots of other lower-class ships that are constantly doing damage to them, and it's outdoing the regeneration. So, let's talk about the weapons that the Necrons have, because of course they are very unique. Weird thing, the Necrons don't tend to use Gauss weapons in space. Whether that's because it doesn't interact well with space is unclear, but they tend to use it just for closer range, like anti-aircraft duties. But the main weapon that they use is the Lightning Arc weapons. Lightning Arc weapons jump between multiple ships, and they have lots of shots, but they have relatively low AP and damage, which really means that arc weapons are best used against shielding. This is probably the first part of the Necron 1-2 punch, that is the Lightning Arc and the Particle Whip. The Lightning Arc weapons are designed so that you can have multiple ships close to each other, that you're able to essentially dump a whole bunch of shots into one enemy vessel, and then you can drop some voids on another enemy vessel. You know, lightning arcs don't do no damage, but they can be mitigated by heavy armor pretty easily. For example, lower tier arc weapons will be literally incapable of doing any damage to something like a Grand Cruiser. And even against a battlecruiser, Tier 1 Lightning Arc weapons will not do much whatsoever. Luckily, the Necrons don't have a lot of Tier 1 weapons because they don't carry a lot of escorts with them. However, even the Tier 2s are going to struggle with something like capital ship armor, and that's where the second weapon comes in, the Particle Whip. The Particle Whip is a massive dark matter cannon. It has very high AP and damage, but it's only one shot per turn, and it has relatively short range. I say relatively because the AP and damage is pretty much analogous to something like a Nova Cannon. It will strip multiple layers of voids, but it is not preferred to use against voids because, of course, it only has one shot as opposed to the lightning arcs, which have lots of shots. And unlike missiles, they don't have half damage against shields, so they do full damage against shields, lots of shots, and they can chain to other vessels. Lightning arc weapons are great. But the Particle Whip is really like a Nova Cannon, just short range. So, once you're in that short, like 10 grav distance, unlike the Nova Cannon, which fires like 20 minimum, that 10 grav distance, and you knock down the enemy's shields with your lightning arc weapons, again, relatively medium to short range, 14 or so grav. Still have a turn of shooting at them with the lightning arc weapons, and then once their shields are down, you slap them with the Particle Whip, and the Particle Whip has great armor penetration and great blunt damage, just like the Nova Cannon does, and it can really cripple escort ships with only a single shot. And of course, there are Necron vessels that carry multiple Particle Whips, and that could really damage cruiser-class vessels without much difficulty whatsoever, and they will penetrate right way through most of the armor, no matter what. The other option is a bit of an odd one. Draining weapons. Draining weapons slow enemy ships. Essentially, it drops their speed to 0 for the next turn. If they want to move, they have to spend an action to essentially accelerate. And it deals a minimal flat damage through shields and armor. Now, drain weapons are essentially the Necron equivalent to torpedoes, kind of like the drain torpedoes that the Eldar or the Dark Eldar use. These slow down enemy ships, and they can kind of stun lock them, but drain weapons are also relatively short range, and they can only target a single enemy ship at a time. So they have that limitation, but outside of that, they also automatically pass through shields and pass through armor, dealing a flat, like, 5 damage, roughly, to the enemy ship. So you can kind of flashbang the enemy to death, but it's not a high damage weapon, these drain weapons. The organization of these weapons, because of how the Necron ships are, there is a curve surface, that is a 180, and a flexible surface, which is usually particle weapons, and that fires 360. Now again, that essentially means that these big, heavy-hitting weapons will be able to target enemies that have their shields down no matter where they are in relation to the Necron ship, which is good because a lot of the flex weapons aren't so good, or a lot of the curve weapons, or the quote-unquote Necron broadside. In reality, it's a 180-degree arc of fire, because of course, these guns on this, like, hook of the curve can fire across it at other targets, and these ones can do the same, but these gantries or sets of weapons at the front really are kind of frontal-facing weapons, but they have a much wider fire arc than fixed weapons that the Imperials have, so they work almost like a hybrid between broadside weapons and fixed weapons. Which is why not a lot of Necron ships actually have full-on broadside weapons. Matter of fact, none of them do. They rely more on the flexible particle whips, and then they have drain weapons and lightning arc weapons on this curved section at the front. So let's get into the capital ship stats. The first one is the biggest, the Cairn Tomb Ship. It is a massive battleship, and it is one of the only actual battleships available to the Necrons, outside of those unique, crazy ones like the Planet Killers. It is weapon tier 3, but only speed 1. Cairn tomb ships are huge, but they are also very, very slow. They are practically continent-sized. But respecting that, they have a resilience of 200 and an armor of 18. They are tougher, healthier, and better armored than any Necron ship in existence. They are the match, minus their regeneration, for any Imperial battleship, and they can pretty easily knock them out considering how well armed they are. But with 200 resilience and their regeneration, they are really hard to take out, and with 18 armor, tier 2 ships will literally not even be able to take it down, I think, whatsoever, unless they're very heavily armed with something like Nova Cannons or something of that nature. Very, very hard to knock out the Cairn Tomb ship. For its weaponry, it has a curve and a flex. So for its curve, it has 3 arc generators, one on one side, one on the other side, and one in the dead center. And then it has 2 drain generators, one kind of in the middle wing here and one on the other middle wing. And then on top of that, it has 3 flexible particle whips, which is again insane because it's essentially 3 short-range Nova cannons that it has access to. And a 12 manpower. Again, the manpower is very low for Necron ships because they don't require a lot of manning. They have a lot of things controlled by scarabs and technology. And then an Auspex accuracy of 18, which is also much higher than most other Necron vessels. It also has another little special weapon. It has a Psychic Sepulcher, and it makes people go crazy, and this is the strongest regular Necron ship. Again, discounting those insane one-off ship designs, the Cairn Tomb ship is one of the most powerful vessels in the entire navy of the Necrons, and that's one of the reasons why it is so rare. These have been sighted very, very rarely, but when they go into battle, you can see how dangerous it is to fight these. Once you get within range, you're facing 3 Tier 3 arc generators, which will strip the shields from a cruiser-class vessel in a single broadside, then 2 drain generators, which will keep you in its arc of fire and essentially make you dead in the water, and then 3 particle whips so that it can just lash you to death. This thing could probably easily get a light cruiser into critical damage range in only 2 rounds, and it could probably do a similar thing to a cruiser if they weren't smart about it. But in any case, the Cairn Tomb ship can dumpster cruisers, it can defeat large capital ships without much difficulty, and because of its resilience and its durability, it can overcome even multiple capital class ships, but it's going to need help to do so. So if I were to put a single Cairn-class tomb ship up against something like a pair of Apocalypse classes, I think the Apocalypse classes would probably be able to outdamage it, just because they have their lances and their Nova cannons, but against smaller ships or grand cruisers or battle cruisers, the Cairn tomb ship has an advantage. And for that reason, usually the tomb ships only show up with a entourage of scythe harvester ships or other battle cruiser or cruiser type vessels. You can see here as well, light cruiser, battle cruiser, all that kind of stuff coming with this battleship so that it can't get overwhelmed. Moving on to a little bit of a confusing one, the Scourge Grand Cruiser. Now this doesn't actually strike me as a real Grand Cruiser, it's built more like a battle cruiser, especially in how it's designed and armed. Now it is again very, very slow, much like the Cairn Tomb ship with only a speed of 1 gravity, but it has tier 3 weapons, 160 resilience, again dropping 40 off the Cairn Tomb ship, it's significantly smaller, and an armor of 16, still not bad for the Necrons, but definitely lower than the really big battleships. And its only weaponry is 3 launch bays, and 2 arc generators. So it again has 5 weapons along the curve, but no particle whips and no drain generators. So really this is a fleet carrier. It's a fleet support carrier option for the Necron. So it calls itself a Grand Cruiser. In my opinion, this is a fleet carrier, and it's armed more like a Grand Cruiser, but it's built like a battle cruiser, considering its resilience, its armor, and its launch bay specific stuff. So not a lot of Grand Cruisers have just launch bays, but a lot of battle cruisers do have a mix of launch bays and weapons. Again, this is more on the launch side than the arc generator side, so you could argue back and forth. They call it a Grand Cruiser. I would call it more of a mix between the Grand Cruiser's armament and the battle cruiser's design and reason to exist. Again, considering how few Necron vessels actually have launch bays, I was really surprised by how few of them actually do, but the Scourge would definitely be something that I could see being used a lot as a fleet support option. As these capital ships form the center or the heart of a fleet, the Scourge would definitely be a very central point of that, providing support, while also having tier 3 arc generators that it could use to batter down enemy ships and let other cruisers or battle cruisers attack them with particle beam weapons. Manpower of 10, Auspice accuracy 16, pretty standard as we go on. The last one is the primary capital ship of the Necrons, and in my opinion, it's kind of cool. This is the kind of cheap, off-brand, or less expensive, easier to field version of the Grand Cruiser and Tomb ship, which is the Harvest ship. It is classified as a battle cruiser, which I think actually fits it very well because of its design. It has a speed of 2 grav, again being the only capital ship that can accelerate beyond 2 gravities. It has a resilience of 160, which, with the Scourge Grand Cruiser, that makes them on equal levels of durability, especially with its similar armor of 16. Its weaponry, however, is what makes it really separate, and in my opinion, puts it firmly into the battlecruiser class. 3 arc generators, so 3 of this multiple shot, jumping, anti-shield weapons, and a flex of 2 particle whips. So again, you can see this 1-2 combo like you could with the Cairn Tomb ship. It has arc generators to knock out enemy shields, and then it uses particle whips to kill those ships once their shields are gone. Unlike Nova Cannons, particle whips don't need to spend an entire turn reloading. They can fire each turn, which means that in terms of sheer firepower, they actually will be able to do more damage than Nova Cannons, with the limitation of having shorter range. And of course, taking out less shields and things of that nature. But with this combo, you can see how easily the Scythe Harvest ship can be underestimated, especially by enemy cruisers. It certainly doesn't look all that powerful. It's only a little bit tougher than the average cruiser. It's only a little bit better armed than the average Necron warship. Matter of fact, it's just a little bit better armed than some of the light cruisers. And you could definitely see that lulling someone into a false sense of security. They might think, oh, it's just a light glass cannon cruiser. It's actually just as durable as this hybrid Grand Cruiser, and its armament is insanely good at taking down enemy cruisers. So you would definitely need a capital ship to take care of the Scythe. But it can still threaten capital ships with its particle whips. The Scourge Grand Cruiser I don't think is going to be as much of a threat to genuine capital ships. Obviously it has launch bays, but there are ways to mitigate launching of enemy aircraft, for example, fielding your own aircraft. So unlike the Scourge, which might struggle in a 1v1 against enemy capital ships, and it would definitely be highlighted when it was supporting other light cruisers, the Scythe can kind of do it all. It has a very one-size-fits-all armament, where it can deal with both cruisers and capital ships on relatively even footing, and it can dumpster escorts fairly easily. So, let's move on to the cruisers, or should I say the light cruisers, because the Necrons do not have any actual cruiser-class vessels. They only have light cruisers. The Khopesh you could make an argument for, and we'll talk about that in a bit, but let's start with the Shroud and the Cartouche. Again, these are both light cruisers, with a weapon tier of 2 and a speed of 2 grav. You can see again, as a light cruiser, that's still relatively slow. However, the resilience is actually 90, which is a little bit higher than the average light cruiser, because again, these Necron ships do not have shields, and they rely entirely upon regeneration and armor protection, and of course, staying out of enemy fire in order to survive. So they have a little bit more bulk and resilience. With an armor of 14, that's not bad. Again, it's on average for the side armor of an Imperial cruiser, but for a light cruiser, that's definitely a solid up. However, the armament is really where the Shroud and the Cartouche come in for the most impressive equipment. Now, one of them, I believe it's the Shroud, has 3 arc generators, essentially 1 on each wing and then 1 in the center. And that's all that it has. It's just a very anti-shield, anti-escort, shocking weapon. It's got all of that armament at the very front. The other one, the Cartouche, goes into that 1-2 punch that we were talking about. It has 2 arc generators and a flexible particle whip. Essentially, it has again that 2-hit punch, the one weapon that knocks out shields, the one weapon that does high damage. And in that way, the Cartouche is actually more of a multi-class option as opposed to the Shroud, which has much more specific anti-shield, anti-light cruiser, anti-escort options, because those arc generators don't do as much damage as something like macro cannons do because of their lack of armor penetration. It has a manpower of 8 and an Auspex accuracy of 16, and you can kind of see the design with the Shroud and Cartouche. Heavy frontal armament for chasing other cruisers. And again, they're not very fast. They have to spend a lot of their time accelerating themselves and teleporting after enemies that they are chasing. With that said, they do have that heavy frontal armament that they can use to attack enemy cruisers and hunt them down. Especially, I think the premier food for these cruisers would, or for these light cruisers, would be other light cruisers. And again, the Imperium uses light cruisers fairly often, and having a ship that is specifically designed to essentially dunk on them is not a bad idea, and I think the Shroud and Cartouche will absolutely do that, in addition to being able to be used for other purposes. Again, since the other two ships that we're going to talk about are very much not general purpose, they have more specific reasons to exist, the Shroud and Cartouche could definitely be used as piracy, raiding vessels, anti-escort, anti-light cruiser, and then they also have the ability to go head-to-head with other cruisers. But in my opinion, I think they would really get dumpstered by a lot of capital ships, but of course that's what capital ships are for, so it's not really a real downside here. But let's move on to the more odd one, the Khopesh light cruiser, and I hesitate to even call this a light cruiser because of how well it is armed. With a weapon tier of 2, it's still at the same tier and the same speed, but its resilience is 100, increased over the Shroud and Cartouche, and its armor being the same, but look at its weaponry. 3 arc generators, 1 on the front and 2 on the side wings, and 2 particle whips, 1 kind of at the front nose and then 1 at the rear near the command center. This puts it, armament-wise, on par with the Scythe Harvest ship. But, obviously, it's a tier down, so the weapons are doing a little bit less damage, but you can still see, with a manpower of 10, Auspex accuracy 18, this is the heavy artillery that covers other light cruisers. Essentially, one Khopesh will go in, supporting the other capital ship, or in lieu of the other capital ship, and it will tank a lot more resilience with its extra health, and it will deal out a lot more damage with its heavier weaponry, and then the other 2 light cruisers will essentially back it up, assist it, and go after other targets once they turn and flee from the Khopesh. In this way, it kind of is a glass cannon, but it also kind of isn't, because it can heal itself, unlike a lot of other glass cannon ships. And the armament here is stellar. You can see the damage. Arc generators times 3 to knock out enemy shields, and then double particle whips so that it can actually punish multiple ships at the same time, or smack one ship and do a ton of damage. This could insta-jib a lot of enemy escorts fairly easily, which is something that the Shroud and Cartouche can't really claim as much. The Cartouche kind of can, but the Shroud definitely couldn't insta-jib enemy escorts all that easily. The Khopesh can, which is one of the reasons why I actually find it so interesting, because it almost serves this heavy artillery role as a light cruiser. Again, they classify it as a light cruiser. I would almost call this a cruiser in terms of everything except for its armor protection, and that might be the reason why it's delegated to the light cruiser role, but in any case, the Khopesh is very, very cool, and I actually like it a lot, as it serves that kind of slightly heavier than every other ship in its class, and has that extra firepower bonus of the 1-2 punch of arc generators and particle whips. The Sekhem light cruiser. This is a really odd one. Its stats are essentially a copy of the others, except that it has less resilience and a ton more armor protection. Why does it need all this armor protection? Why does it have basically the same stats other than that? It's slower, and all that it has is 3 drain generators. This is the fun police ship. It can stun lock 4 ships. Sorry, it has 3 drain generators, so it can stun lock 3 separate ships at a time. Essentially, what the Sekhem does is it will join up with another higher damage ship, and it will go out, find 3 targets within its range, and then flashbang them with the drain generators, drop all of their speeds to 0, and then stay exactly where it is, and just keep hitting them with the generators over and over and over again, dealing slightly less damage over time, but because of its higher armor, and because of its relatively light cruiser health, it could just keep draining them over and over and over again, and unless they want to spend a turn to try and accelerate and get out of the range, the Sekhem will just continue to hold them in place and just flashbang them to death while they try to, penetrate its armor protection. And the idea is that the Sekhem will kind of go into the center of an enemy formation, identify 3 ships, and just stun lock them constantly, while the rest of the fleet comes in and obliterates them with more high damage weapons than the drain generators. That being said, it is the fun police, and if it's by itself or if it's faced up against enemy ships, drain generators don't do a lot of damage, and they really don't do any damage to ships' armor or to their shielding, so it doesn't really help allied ships outside of slowing the enemy down and dealing chip damage over time. So it's kind of a trade-off there. Heavy armor, slower speed. It's definitely almost like a not a glass cannon, but it's almost like a stun tank in an RPG. So something that has a lot of CC or crowd control, that's basically what the SecM is. So let's talk about the two main escort ships for the Necrons. Again, these are not as common as escorts in other fleets, and they never operate alone. Very, very rarely. There are two classes, the Jackal and the Dirge. They are kind of similar. They have the same exact armament, essentially. But the issue is that the Dirge is just a dramatic upgrade. So the Jackal is a very basic. It's a Jackal class raider. It's an escort. It's got weapon tier 1. Sorry, there's a couple of typos on this page. Apologies. I just finished this. It's got weapon tier 1, a speed of 3 grav, which is, again, fast for the Necrons. 3 grav, it can move up to 4. That's not bad at all. Matter of fact, I probably think that the Jackal, you could even argue that it could go up to 5. You could accelerate it even more. But its resilience is only 30, very low. It doesn't have much of a chance to heal itself. An armor of 10 means that it has absolutely no chance to resist enemy weaponry. And on the curve, it has 2 arc generators, which is, again, very low. Not a lot of damage. No armor penetration there. Not very good in that way. 2 manpower, again, tiny Necron ship. Not doing very much. Auspice accuracy, exactly the same. It's a light, quick, and rangy escort, but it's not deployed alone. It's basically going to be deployed with other ships, usually with other capital or cruiser class vessels, so that it can act as a scout. It's not designed to fight against other escorts, which is something that's unique to the Necrons, is that their escorts are not designed to fight other escorts. They're designed to actually act as scouts and kind of like light destroyers, especially the Dirge, but the Jackal at the very least is a de facto rangy scout. That's all that it is. It's just the fastest, moving quicker, less armored, less tough. It's not going to be getting into any head-on-head fights with enemy escorts anytime soon. Certainly not with Imperial Navy escorts. They would dumpster a Jackal. Dirge class raiders. It's essentially the Jackal, but with everything improved. It moves a little bit faster. It's a lot tougher with 40 resilience. It's more armored with 12 armor. It has the 2 arc generators that the Jackal has as well. A manpower of 3 increasing, but the same aspect accuracy. It's essentially bigger, better, faster, tougher, but rarer. The Dirge class, as opposed to the Jackal, is a little bit rarer because it is that kind of direct upgrade that is improved in almost every respect from the Jackal, but this one will serve a little bit better against armed escorts of the enemy line, and of course that means that it can do more things. Again, the Necrons don't deploy these by themselves basically ever, and they don't really treat them as pirate or raider vessels all that much either. But the Dirge can accomplish that goal, where the Jackal simply doesn't have the firepower, durability, or speed to pull it off. So these ones, the stats are a little bit mutable and a little bit arguable at some times, especially because they are both so similar and so different. But in general, the Dirge is just superior to the Jackal in most cases. So that is the end of our naval series. Unless I start up another thing on the miscellaneous ships or ships that people want to hear about, I might do that. That'd be a fun one, especially considering that I'm nixing the Tyranids, because their ships are, again, based on weight class and not really on statistics. And also, I'd have to go make stats for them, which is a little bit tough. But I'd definitely be willing to do it if a lot of people want to see it. But for now, I just have to say, thank you all so much. This is going to be the last video until our long celebration and stream on Wednesday. Again, come around for that. There's going to be a lot of Nadzibor lore. We're going to be hanging out for quite a bit, a couple of hours. I believe at the moment it's 5 p.m. on Wednesday, Eastern Standard Time. I don't know how long it's going to go, but of course it will be uploaded as a video afterward. That is just the start of our 500 subscriber celebration. It will probably be going on for at least a week and a half, because I have lots of content to show you, lots of things to break up for you guys. I have whole opportunities and activities for you guys to interact with me and to make videos together. We're going to be looking on a lot of stuff. We're going to be updating the channel, and we're going to be finding out new series and new lore things that people want to see. So, with that said, this has been a really great time. I have loved the Navy series so much. It's been so fulfilling to do, but I wish you all a lovely good night.